Spiritual Dryness and the Dark Night of the Soul. Excerpts from the writings of Paul Brunton. Spiritual seekers who find that they seem no closer to the illuminative experience than they were a couple of decades earlier, that the real apparently refuses to obey their calls despite practices and disciplines, may find themselves suffering from depression, frustration, pessimism. It may seem that the divine is saddeningly remote. Know that this is actually a part of the quest's course. It would be wrong to expect to duplicate somebody else's mystical experiences, and equally wrong to regard oneself as a failure because one does not have those experiences. You are not in a position to judge exactly what progress you have made. The spiritual joys are intended to entice seekers onto the quest, or to reward them when they have finished it. That is to say, they are for beginners and adepts. The spiritual drynesses are intended to purify the character, fortify the will, and detach one from the ego. That is to say, they are for sufficiently grown adults. The period of spiritual stagnation and discouragement, which may descend upon spiritual seekers, is called the dark night of the soul. One has come to the end of a stage which was really a preparatory one. The stagnation indicates that the path of self-effort, the long path, is no longer sufficient, and that one must now enter the short path. The limitation of the long path is that it is concerned only with thinning down, weakening, and reducing the ego's strength. It is not concerned with totally deflating the ego. The short path entails trying to remember to live in the rarefied atmosphere of the overself, the higher self, instead of worrying about the ego and measuring its spiritual development. One turns around and looks directly at the goal itself. Identify with the universal and infinite power. Forget that you are an individual. On the short path, the moment negative ideas and feelings appear, instead of using the long path method of concentrating on the opposite kind of thought, the short path way simply drops that negative idea into the void and forgets it. Such a change can only be brought about by doing it quickly and firmly. Direct meditation up to the overself, the higher self, its presence and strength. From the gloom and groaning of the dark night of the soul to the radiance and joy of the short path at its best, the change is startling, dramatic, and revolutionary. However, the endeavors of the short path to practice self-identification with the higher self are merely using imagination and suggestion to create a new mental state that, while imitating the overself state, does not actually transcend the ego mind, but exists within it still. So a third phase becomes necessary, the phase of getting rid of the ego altogether. This can be done only by the final dissolving operation of grace, which seekers have to request and to which they have to give consent. Thus, a rarer and sadder kind of dark night of the soul may come to highly advanced practitioners who are already within sight of their goal. It is a terrible and desolate period when the divine seems as far away as the stars, when aspiration seems dead. It is a melancholic experience lamented by Job and Jeremiah in ancient Israel, by John of Avila in the 17th century Spain, and even by Muhammad, who suffered it for 3 years. Although one feels bereft and forlorn, this is actually a result of the overself's working within the subconscious region of one's being. It is intended to carry development to a further stage, which can appear only when the dark night comes to an end. Even during the longest dark night of the soul, the overself is not a whit less close to one than it was when it revealed its presence amid ecstasy and joy. Take to heart the truth that no spiritual darkness is a permanent one, and that at no time is one a really lost, deserted, or fallen creature. When the ego knows that it is beaten, when it gives up its striving, efforts, and goals, when it lies prostrate and calls out to the higher power in despair or surrender, there is then a chance that grace will appear. To summarize the entire process, the long path leads to the short path, and the short path leads to the grace of an unbroken, egoless consciousness. Always trust in the eventuality of grace. You are not really walking alone. Take heart and feel hope.